Senator Feinstein previously asked you whether you'd put your June 2018 memo, whether you put together that memo based on non-public information. Your response was that you, quote, did not rely on confidential information. Are you creating a distinction between non-public information and confidential information? No. Okay. In response to a question from Senator Durbin about harsh sentencing laws, you stated in response to the crack epidemic that community leaders, back when you were Attorney General previously, asked for these types of sentencing laws. Now, my understanding is that many of these community leaders at that time, and I was a young prosecutor during those days, knew and said even then that the crack epidemic was a public health crisis, and that was really the chorus coming from community leaders, not that they wanted drug-addicted people to be locked up. And similarly, now we can find that in most of the communities afflicted by the opioid crisis, they are similarly, these community leaders, asking that it be addressed for the public health crisis that it is. So my question is, if and when you are confirmed in this position, would you agree that when we talk about the opioid crisis, the crisis in terms of methamphetamine addiction or any other controlled substance, that we should also acknowledge the public health ramifications and causes, and that there is a role for the chief law enforcement officer of the United States to play in advocating for a public health response and not only a lock-em-up response?
Well, I think the commission that was chaired by Governor Chris Christie came up with a three-pronged strategy. And I think that I said part of it was treatment and education, recovery, and prevention. But the third prong of it was enforcement and interdiction, and that's the job of the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice can't be all things to all people.
Sir, but I would suggest to you that in the intervening almost 30 years since you were last Attorney General, that there is consensus in the United States that when we look at the drug epidemic, whatever the narcotic may be, that there's now an understanding that the war on drugs was an abject failure, that America, frankly, has a crisis of addiction, and that putting the limited resources of our federal government into locking up people who suffer from a public health crisis is probably not the smartest use of taxpayer dollars. So if confirmed, I'd ask that you take a look at the more recent perspective on the drug crisis that is afflicting our country. And then I'll move on. Today, there is $1 billion.
Can I just say something in response to that?
Sure.
Which is, I was just making the observation that the job of the Department of Justice is enforcement. I recognize there are a lot of dimensions to the problem, and that's why we have places like HHS. The department can't be, can't do the job of everybody.
Sir, but I would remind you what you said, because I agree with it. You said earlier the role of the Attorney General, one, is to enforce the rule of law, 2 is a legal advisor to the President and the Cabinet, and 3 is policy. This is a policy issue, so I'd urge you to emphasize that role and power that you will have if confirmed, and think of it that way.
I see you.